Good evening, and welcome to our midweek meditation time. And I have a story that I'm going to share here in a moment. This coming Sunday is a Sunday we call Transfiguration Day. Perhaps I think you know the story. Jesus takes Peter, James, and John up a mountain, and Jesus is transfigured. Bright, shine, and there's a conversation that goes on between the old prophets and Jesus. And the three disciples have a few things to try to say, somewhat unsuccessfully. But this is the day that marks the end of the season of Epiphany. And then, of course, we move into the season of Lent, which begins on Ash Wednesday, which will be next week. And I like to tell stories and read stories. One of my favorite writers is a pastor named William R. White. This book was printed some time ago. At the time he wrote this collection, he was pastor of Bethel Lutheran Church in Madison, Wisconsin. And it's a compilation of wonderful stories, but the one I want to read is one that he wrote specifically for Transfiguration Sunday. And the title of the story is called The Dale Star Show. Okay? Here we go. One Sunday, Evan Iverson told the people at church, "Next Friday will be the biggest day of my life." Evan graduated from Tittabawassee High School in mid-Michigan 10 years ago, and after staying home a year, he enrolled in a community college near Saginaw to study electronics. High school had not gone well for Evan. Many teachers thought his social skills impeded his learning. The victim of a car accident at age 3, Evan grew up with a metal brace on his leg and a chip on his shoulder. In grade school and junior high, he answered every cruel joke, every taunt with his fists. In high school, he became less combative and more secluded. And during his teen years, an insult about his disability created depression rather than anger. When things didn't go any better in college than at Tittabawassee High, he quit. Ashamed to move home, he found a job as a part-time custodian at St. Thomas Church. What appealed to him when he read the ad in the paper was the pastor's name, Garth Evans. And Evan thought it was fate that they shared a nearly identical name. In Pastor Evans, an older man whose wife had died 3 years earlier, Evan found his first real friend. Each morning at exactly 10:15, the two drank coffee and talked. On Saturdays, when Pastor Evans finished his sermon around 10:45, he'd step out into the hall and yelled, "It's donut hole time!" And the two men celebrated the end of the pastor's work week with pastries, coffee, and a conversation that often lasted as long as 2 hours. During their Sunday morning celebration, Evan always asked, "What's the sermon about tomorrow?" The pastor then outlined what he had just written. This exercise seemed to serve both men well. Pastor Evans had an opportunity for an oral rehearsal, and Evan, who always sat out in the hall during the service, got a sneak preview of the next day's main attraction. In addition to his job, there were two other great loves in Evan's life: his train set and country western music. To accommodate his first hobby, he used the money left him by his late grandmother to buy a small house with a large garage on the north side of town. The two-story garage was turned into a train depot with a central dispatch and hundreds of feet of track. Excuse me. A neighbor painted the Michigan countryside on the walls, and he created rivers and hills to make the set more authentic. The operation became so large that it took at least 3 people to run it properly. To pay for his great passion, Evan took an evening job as a security officer at a local restaurant. The second love of his life was directed primarily to the famous country balladeer Dale Starr. Evan purchased all of Dale Starr's albums and committed every lyric to memory. He decorated his entire bedroom with pictures of the tall singer who was known as the man with the curly black hair. Evan, normally a quiet man, was quite vocal about his taste in music. At St. Thomas, he frequently cornered the organist and choir director to press his point. The church would improve dramatically if we used a few Dale Starr songs, he insisted. One September, Evan read that Dale Starr was coming to the Civic Auditorium in late winter. He not only wanted to attend the concert, he desperately desired to meet this great man. A week later, he discovered that the Civic Auditorium needed a part-time janitor on weekends. Evan immediately quit his job at the restaurant and hired on. "Don't you see," he explained to Pastor Evans, "I'll have security clearance at the Civic, and I'm almost certain to meet him. This is a chance of a lifetime. Years ago, my father met the great Myron Florin, and to this day, he hasn't stopped talking about it." As the days to the concert grew shorter, Evan's speeches about his hero grew longer. Nearly every morning during the coffee break, he recited the lyrics of at least one of Dale Starr's songs, many of which talked about friendship and love. On 2 different occasions, he used the Sunday school's tape recorder to play his favorite tune, a tender ballad that told the tale of an old man who adopted a small sick boy. On the day of the concert, Evan was almost too excited to go to work. He left church at noon and arrived at the Civic Auditorium at 4 o'clock, 2 hours early and 4 hours before the concert began. His heart raced when he saw the big bus in the parking lot with the Dale Starr Show written across it. After he punched the time clock, he made his way toward the space set aside for the singer. He was surprised to find only a handful of fans near the door. Evan had expected hundreds, perhaps thousands of people. He began to push a broom up and down the hallway outside the balladeer's dressing room. When he had cleaned the hallway 8 or 9 times, he decided to change the light bulbs, even those not burned out, hoping that the door would open and he would catch a glimpse of his hero. As he worked, Evan noticed that on different occasions the singer's manager brought girls into the dressing room. Around 5 o'clock, Evan heard a loud noise, and a few seconds later, the door flew open. "Hey, kid," the manager shouted, "we need a mop and a broom." This was his big moment. Evan hurried over to the corner, filled a pail with water, and along with the requested items, entered into what he considered the Holy of Holies. The room was divided in half by a curtain that reached nearly to the floor. All Evan could see in the open half was a table and the manager. From behind the curtain that extended nearly the full length of the room, Evan saw smoke and girls giggling. Over here, the manager pointed. A pitcher had fallen to the floor, sending water and pieces of glass everywhere. Slowly, Evan began to sweep up the glass while stealing looks in the direction of the giggles. Once, when the broom reached under the curtain to retrieve a broken piece of glass, an angry voice came from behind the curtain, told him to keep his broom on the other side. He had finished sweeping and had begun to mop up the water when he slipped and fell into the curtain and bumped a chair on the other side. Suddenly, he heard profanity. He turned around and saw his wavy-haired hero, shirt off, glass in one hand, cigarette in the other, staring at him. "Who let this jerk into the room?" he roared. Evan slowly walked across the room to pick up his pail, and once again the singer addressed him. "Get it in gear, do your job, and hobble out of here. Girls, come back, come look at this prophetic little crip." Dale Starr drew back the curtain, and 3 girls giggled. The big star walked toward Evan, poured the contents of his drink on the floor. "Here's a little more for you to clean up. Now get your butt moving." Tears filled Evan's eyes. The insults triggered horrible memories. Before he could think, he grabbed the mop pail and flung the water with all his might at the singer. And then he put his hands on his hips as if to dare the larger man to retaliate. Excuse me. Instead, Starr stood stunned, wiping the water off his face. Moments later, Evan's anger turned to unbelief. Down on the floor, floating on a sea of mop water, was a large piece of black wavy hair. The man was as bald as a glass bowl. For a moment, the girls stared incomprehensibly. Then it all sank in and they began to hang on to each other and giggle. Even Evan looked at the singer and the girls and began to laugh uncontrollably. Finally, he walked out of the building, got in his car, and went home. The next morning, right on schedule, Evan arrived at work with a bag of donut holes in hand. At coffee, Pastor Evan, sensing something was wrong, waited for Evan to talk about his concert. Instead, Evan asked him his unusual question. "What's the sermon about this week?" "Well, I know what the text is, but for the first time in months, I haven't completed the sermon. By mid-morning Saturday, I don't know what to do with the assigned story." Evan asked the pastor to explain. "This Sunday, we will focus on what most people call Transfiguration," he began. Jesus takes 3 disciples up a mountain where he meets Moses, the great lawgiver, and Elijah, the great prophet. The appearance of Jesus is changed, and his clothes become as bright as a flash of lightning. And with all this stuff is going on, the disciples fall asleep. And when they wake up, Peter wants to treat each of the 3 great leaders the same, building each of them a shelter. Now here's the problem. The 3 men aren't the same. Only Jesus is changed. And when God speaks, he speaks only to Jesus. "This is my son, my chosen. Listen to him." This is a story about the uniqueness of Jesus. Pastor Evans was gesturing wildly. Jesus is the culmination of all that is taught in the Old Testament. Here's my question. Should I speak about the glory of Jesus? People often get that all mixed up. They think glory is privilege. They think being great means being rich and riding around in a limousine. The greatness of Jesus is in his willingness to give himself and to suffer. I guess that is why we read the story just before Lent. The pastor sighed. The problem is, I've said all this before. I'd like something fresh. The two men took a sip of coffee and nibbled on their last donut hole. Perhaps, Evan began haltingly, perhaps you could talk about how eventually all our heroes fail us. Perhaps you could tell us how all of those we put on pedestals must be taken down. Our parents, older siblings, sports stars, people we see on TV. The pastor listened intently. Most of us have been disappointed in our life by someone we thought was important. I think you're right. We really do get mixed up about what it means to be great. What we make people into gods, which is idolatry. Isn't this what the first commandment is all about? The only one who doesn't fail us is Jesus. The only one who teaches us is the real meaning of greatness is Jesus. Again, the pastor nodded. Evan got a little bolder. You know, Pastor, we need to be reminded about these things all the time. We need to be reminded that the greatness of Jesus led him to the cross. We need to hear how compassion is greatness and how we see his compassion with the healing of the blind and curing of the lame. We need to hear that to be great is to be kind. Look at how he treated everybody with dignity. He cared about children and people with disabilities. No one spoke for almost 2 minutes before Pastor Evans said, "You've been a great help, my friend." "No problem," Evans said. He started to walk a few steps down the hall before he turned around. "It wouldn't hurt if you said something about the disciples falling asleep. I've got a feeling that God is often doing something right before our eyes and we're taking a nap. We miss what God is doing." The pastor took out a pencil and jotted down some ideas on a napkin. "Do you think I ought to tie this whole thing into Lent and the suffering of Jesus? How could I tell the greatness of Christ leads us to his obedience and his suffering? I could urge people to use the 40 days of Lent as a time to mimic Jesus. What do you think?" Evan, hand on the door, shook his head. "Pastor, give me a break. You're going to have to make some decisions yourself. I can't write the whole sermon for you. Besides, I got to run to the music store. I thought I'd pick up something by this Bach guy that you love so much." That's a great story, isn't it? I mean, I think we've all had some mountaintop moments, of course, right? Sometimes when we feel like we're on top of the world and real happy, confident that we knew all the answers and could solve any problem that came up. Or we felt that we were really close to God, really in tune with what God was up to. And in those moments, we're excited and alive, and everything seemed new. And oh, how we don't want to come down off that mountain. We want to hang on to that mountaintop moment for as long as we can. Let's just stay right here. Isn't this nice? Wouldn't that be nice if we could just stay? But to freeze the moment like Evan did over his many years holding up Dale Starr as his hero, to shut off the possibility of the next moment, it's not a good idea. There's light all around us. I want you to ponder that just for a bit. More on this on Sunday. Thank you for listening.